of risk management for
This meeting is being recorded.
Oh, sorry. That was a little bit of a delayed reaction. Go ahead and start again.
Not a problem. Yeah, so I'm the director of risk management for Fox and Roach, and one of the things that I've become sort of the company expert on is the rental programs for each of the 3 states. But I get involved with a lot of other things, daily questions that you run up to your manager, and the manager may just want to double check on their answers. They bring them to me. I oversee some of the litigation in New Jersey, although I'm not a lawyer. I've just been doing this for a very long time. So I'm pretty much, I'm part of the legal department, although, as I said, I'm not an attorney. And I get involved in mostly matters involving regulatory compliance. So that's why I'm part of the rental discussion most of the time. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks, Dawn. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen with all of you. So just give me a thumbs up if you can see what you're looking at. Excellent, thank you. Oh, we're going to go all the way back to the beginning. Okay. So welcome to today's class. We are going to be providing all of you with basically a refresher course on how New Jersey rentals work and how and why could work with both tenants and landlords. Let me just mute everybody real quick. Okay. So the first thing that I want to start a discussion with all of you about is the common myths or objections that I hear on almost a daily basis about why agents do not want to work, primarily with tenants, but also sometimes with landlords. So things that I've heard that you've probably heard, thought to yourself, or even said out loud are, it's not worth my time. I'm not going to make any money. Most tenants aren't qualified. If they were, they'd be buying something, or it's just too complicated. So we're going to take the time to kind of address these objections and what you can do to mitigate these circumstances. So let's talk about why it is worth your time. Okay. So if you're thinking it's just too time consuming, that's a valid point. Sometimes it can be, but there are definitely steps you can take to mitigate wasting your time. The first step is always going to be, and I think the most important, having a frank conversation with that potential client. The best thing you can do is get to know that client and specifics about why they are in the rental market, such as why do they have to move? Have they ever had any issues with renting in the past, whether it's an eviction or having trouble finding something? Do they have a job, and what is their approximate income? Is what they are looking for and the budget they have reasonable? Are you going to be able to find something within their budget based upon their income? We should all kind of know by now that in general, your client should be making, if it's a tenant, 3 times per month what the monthly rent is. That's just kind of a good rule. It's not a hard and fast law, but it's a, good guideline. Do they have pets? Because that's obviously going to impact and limit the type of rentals that they can find. And what is their long-term plan? When do they need to move by? How long of a rental period do they need? Do they just want to rent for a year and then they have plans for something else after that? Do they need a multiple year lease? That kind of thing. The more you know about your client, the more you can prepare a plan of action and target your search so that you're not wasting time looking for rentals or showing them rentals that aren't going to be suitable. You can also pre-qualify your tenants. NTN is what we use through Fox and Roach, and you can still run the basic eviction and credit check in advance if you choose to do so. Just be aware that there is a fee for that. Dawn, I think it's still $40 per applicant, correct? Great. Okay, so $40 per applicant. So you want to make your client aware that there is a fee for that, and that there's no guarantee that every rental out there will accept that NTN report. So the chance exists that they might wind up spending additional money on a second application fee. So if they don't want to do that, or you don't want to ask them to do that, you can have them fill out the Berkshire Hathaway rental app paper in zip forms. So you can collect all of the relevant information that you're going to need to know about them up front. You can ask them for a copy of their driver's license. And you can also ask for proof of income, because they're going to need to have that anyway when they do an actual application. So that can be, you know, pay stubs, tax returns, whatever they have that's handy. So if you are getting at least, ooh, we're spazzing out here. If you are getting at least the basic information about a tenant, you're going to have a pretty good idea of how well qualified they are and any problems that might arise while you're trying to help them find a rental. The next thing you want to do is make sure you're setting up your search correctly. Again, you should have already had that conversation, so you know what they're looking for, you know what date they need to move by, you know if there's any extenuating circumstances, like they have a pet, or they need laundry on site, or they have to have 2 parking spots, or whatever the case might be. The more you can target that search, you know, the easier it's going to be for you. In addition to the automated search and the MLS, feel free to send them the link to your branded HomeSnap app. HomeSnap is not just for sale homes. There is also a, you know, just as good rental search in the HomeSnap application itself. So if you are giving that mobile app to your clients, they're going to be using that to search for properties rather than sending you a bunch of garbage listings from Zillow or Trulia or Redfin or Homes.com or any of those places where we are seeing, you know, scam rental listings, or the listing is just through the landlord and they don't want to work with a realtor. Those are the type of listings you don't want to be wasting your time with, and you don't want your client to be wasting their time sending you. So get them set up in the MLS, give them the HomeSnap app. Okay. Next thing, which seems pretty obvious, but we're going to talk about it anyway, is try to schedule as many rental showings as you can in a given day, right? If you can book 5 to 6 appointments in a day, you don't need a half hour, 45 minutes, or an hour to show a rental property. You can get in and out of there 15 minutes, you know, half hour at the most. So you should be able to schedule, you know, a large group. Generally, they're looking in a pretty specific area, close to work or close to their child's school, whatever the case might be. So it's easy to take them out, see as many places as you can on any given trip. And generally, tenants are a lot less picky than buyers. So if you're able to show them, you know, 5, 6, 7 properties, they're probably going to be ready to pick one to put in an application for. So the reality is, if you're taking these steps, you're able to manage the amount of time that you're spending on a tenant client, and it's not going to be a waste of your time. Let's talk about money, right? Because that's what we all care about, the bottom line for sure. So a lot of people say, you know, rentals aren't worth it because my commission is only half a month's rent. That's true. You're never going to make, you know, as big of a commission on a rental as you're going to make on a buy or a sell. However, the turnaround time is a lot faster. You're not waiting 30 or more days for a closing. There's no inspection periods. There's no mortgage underwriting. You're not crossing your fingers hoping that when you get to that closing table, everything is going to go smoothly, right? They pick a place, they apply, they're approved by the landlord. You sign the leases and appropriate documents. They bring in the checks. You're done. You get paid. So the turnaround time is kind of worth the fact that you're not getting as big of a commission check. Rentals are also kind of an underestimated source of income. It's a valid income stream for all of us, because even when the market, you know, bottoms out or is slow on certain months, there's always people looking for rentals. And I can tell you from personal experience over 8 years of doing this, that specifically in December, when generally we're all pretty dang dead, I have had very good month of December that was 100% rentals, right? So that's just a secondary stream of income that if you put a little bit of effort into, it's always going to be there for you to fall back on or to supplement, your sales. Another seemingly obvious one that I think people don't give enough credit to is that tenants turn into buyers and landlords turn into sellers. So if you are working with a tenant and you notice that their NTN comes back very strong, their credit score is very high, they're looking to rent a property and they're willing to spend up to $2,800 a month, just to get into a 3-bedroom, it's probably worth having a conversation with that tenant about whether or not, they've looked into purchasing and seeing if they can get pre-approved. I have lost track of the number of tenants that I have flipped into buyers. It's way up there. Same thing for landlords. They might not realize how much money they can get in this market. So if you're working with a landlord and you're taking the time to look at rental comps, why not send them a CMA as well, right? Or they may get so frustrated with the process, they may decide, you know what, forget it. I don't want to rent this place anymore. I'm just going to sell it. And you're the realtor they're going to use because you were already putting in the effort to help them with the rental process. You're also going to be a hero, right? And when you're the hero, you're going to get referrals, and referrals are gold in this business. Finding a rental for either a tenant or finding the right tenant for a landlord is extremely difficult for them to do on their own. So if they're able to work with you as a real estate professional and you're able to make that process easier for them, you're going to be the agent that they're going to refer all their friends and family to. And those friends and family probably aren't tenants, right? They may be buyers, sellers, etc. So that's a really good reason to keep in mind. Word of mouth.
Already?
Next objection that I hear a lot of the time is if someone's looking for a rental, then they're not qualified to buy. So, what's the point? Well, don't assume that. You don't know what someone's reason is that they are looking to rent. They very well might be able to qualify to purchase something. Maybe they just want to rent in an area for a short time to figure out if that's where they want to live before they purchase. Maybe they have not even thought about the idea that they might be able to qualify for a mortgage. Maybe you're the first person who's ever pointed that out to them, right? Maybe they have a home to sell and they need someplace to go before they want to purchase something. There are any number of reasons why someone is looking for a rental, and assuming it's because their credit is bad or they don't make any money is just a hole I don't want you guys to fall into. And on the flip side, we already kind of mentioned this, landlords might not know what they can get for their property in today's market. So if you're doing rental comps for a landlord, give them a full CMA for the sale of their home along with it and just start that conversation. Okay, last objection, it's just too complicated. And yes, it can absolutely feel that way, especially if you do not know for sure what you're doing, right? So if there are changes to local, state, and federal laws, there's changes to the forms we need to use, you're hearing, different processes from different people, it can seem very confusing. But part of the reason I wanted to have this class today is to actually cover the basics of how to work with rental clients so that you feel more confident and more comfortable and are ready to expand into that market. So what we're going to get into now is reviewing the new forms. We're going to do an overview of the changes to the Fair Housing Act. We're going to look at NTN and why you should use it versus other screening reports. We're going to talk about some best practices, and I'm going to provide you guys with some resources that you can visit to expand your knowledge. Before we launch into this, did anybody have any questions thus far? Go ahead and unmute yourself or drop it in the chat. Not seeing anybody. All right. So let's talk about the changes to the New Jersey Fair Housing Act and what they mean for us as agents. And Dawn, this is where if I miss anything, please feel free to jump on in. Okay. And we'll get into we'll get into this in some more detail as we go, but here are the general things that you're going to have to be aware of. Okay. So the first thing is that there are now additional disclosures. Oops, why does it keep skipping? There we go. There are now additional disclosures and an expanded attorney general letter that you need to get signed before any screenings are done. As I mentioned before, credit and eviction screenings can be done ahead of time, but you cannot run a criminal history until that tenant is conditionally approved. And your landlords can only conditionally approve one tenant at a time. Division on Civil Rights in New Jersey is the entity that investigates complaints. And trust me, and I'm sure Dom will back this up, you do not want to be on their bad side. So, make sure you understand what all of the laws entail.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would also add that the Fair Chance in Housing Act was also written and promulgated by the Division on Civil Rights. So they're doing more than investigating the complaints. They are now providing instruction with very specific guidelines. So they wrote the law.
Perfect. And we're going to get into where you can go read it and all that later on. Okay. And something else to be aware of is our law here in New Jersey, the Fair Housing Act, as Dawn mentioned, actually is more expansive than the federal laws. So since we're operating in the state of New Jersey, those are the laws, that we need to really focus on because they go above and beyond even what exists at the federal level with many more protected classes. And as Dawn mentioned, the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights provides guidelines for the law in general, but also specifically on any decision your landlord is going to be making based on criminal history. And we'll talk a little bit more about what the look back period is as we go. All right, any questions thus far? All right, Susie, how many days or months ahead of time does landlord have to tell tenant that they need to sell the property? So I believe the New Jersey lease, is it 90 days? We'll pull up, we're going to look at the forms later so we can absolutely ask that question.
I don't remember. I would say this answer is it depends. And it depends what's in the lease, depending on which lease is being used and whether or not the time period has been modified. So it really depends.
So Susie, hang tight with that question because we will review all that and hopefully we'll be able to answer that for you. Okay. What are the new forms that we now need to have? Okay, there's the updated Attorney General letter. There's the New Jersey Fair Chance Act disclosure and screening procedures, which I believe Dawn wrote for all of us. So thanks, Dawn. There are.
I stole the disclosure, but I did write the screening procedures.
Fantastic. There are updated NTN forms that are slightly different now, as well as an updated NTN procedure that we'll review. There is a form called the Notice of Conditional Approval that your landlord would use to notify a prospective tenant that they are conditionally approved if they plan on also running a criminal background check. And then there is the New Jersey Fair Chance in Housing Notice of Withdrawal of Conditional Offer. So that is going to be used if your landlord has conditionally approved a tenant, they have done the criminal history check through NTN after the conditional approval, something within the bounds of the law is on that criminal history report that your landlord is allowed to use to make a decision, they can then withdraw the conditional offer to rent from that tenant and move on to the next tenant. All right, so before we get into best practices and while we're still thinking about it, let's look at some of those forms, okay? So I believe that these have not been integrated into our Zip Forms account yet. I
You know
know
what?
they're,
I'm going to look it up right now because
Okay.
they're just being published or they're very soon to be published. So
yeah,
I'll check while we talk.
I opened a new rental this morning and they were not yet there. So, but I'll show everybody
Yeah.
where you can get them.
All right, let me see if they're in the library. We'll start there. And if they are, then I can just add them to the templates pretty easily. One more second. J. No, they have not yet published. So they're about to, literally any day now. So
Yes, we've been anxiously awaiting that. But in the meantime, if you are actively working with a landlord or a tenant, you need to access these forms. So I'm going to show you how you do that. So all you need to do is log into your ACE dashboard. And if you just type NTN into the search box and hit enter and scroll down, you're going to see the NTN Secure app, which is the link that you can provide to tenants to fill out the online application. And then you're going to see the NTN tenant application process. And there are tons of very useful documents, including those we've just mentioned, in this link. So if we click the application process tab, below, you're going to see all of these documents related to NTN, but at the top, you're going to see two folders. So this first folder, if we open it, has the new Attorney General letter in it. You know it's the new one because the date on it is December of 2021. And unlike the previous one, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you will notice that both you and the property owner need to sign this document. Okay, so this is what you are using with landlords.
yeah, so this is currently attached to your contract for sale from Nexus and any of the association produced listing contracts. If any of you are from North Jersey, we are attaching, part of what's being programmed at Zip Forms right now is the North Jersey listing contract with the AG statement attached. So we're soon to be fully functional.
I'm going to look now and see if they've attached it to the lease.
It doesn't need to go on the lease. It needs to go on the listing contract.
Okay, so it would be, you're giving it, so let's look at that.
Yeah.
All right, this is a tenant. So let's do. Oh, would that just be the regular listing agreement, right?
Yeah, from Nexus.
Yeah. So it should be on here. So if you're using that for a rental, it will operate the same exact way. So if you're getting this signed by your landlord, there it is right at the bottom. So you don't have to do it separately. Just remember that you have to scroll all the way down and add those two signatures. Okay. Okay, so we're going to go back into the NTN Secure app information. And this second folder at the top is where all the New Jersey Fair Chance documents are. Okay. So let's look at this because I find this super useful. This is a flow chart on how the Fair Chance Act is going to impact how you are handling tenants or how your landlord is handling tenants. Okay. So the first thing that happens is you send the NTN link to the prospective tenant. Once you've done that, there is a second piece of paper that I'm going to show you that you fill out and send to NTN so that you can get a copy of the results to review with the landlord. And then it's going to go one of two ways, right? If the initial NTN eviction and credit check is good, your landlord can conditionally approve that tenant, or they cannot approve the tenant. If they don't approve the tenant because the NTN score isn't high enough, they have 6 evictions, whatever the case might be, then you're just going to send that prospective tenant the adverse action letter saying that the landlord is choosing not to offer a rental to them and why. If the landlord does conditionally approve that tenant, you're going to have the landlord sign the conditional offer letter, send that to the tenant, and then you're going to request the additional criminal history background check from NTN. Okay. Once that is generated, again, you're going to present that to your landlord. If there's no criminal records reported, you're done. You go ahead, you write up the leases, everybody's happy. If criminal records are reported, it does get a little bit more complicated, but they do provide guidelines for your landlord on what they can actually use to make a decision. Okay, so the landlord will allow the tenant to provide more information or to challenge the records that were found. And then the landlord will make a final decision based on the Fair Chance Act guidance. And I'm going to show you where that exists. If this results in a denial, then the landlord has to provide, again, an adverse action letter. Okay. Any questions on kind of that flow chart or how that works? No. Okay, cool. All right. So we were talking about the disclosure, which I believe is right here. Okay. So this is the screening disclosure. It explains the process. Go ahead, Dawn.
Yeah, this disclosure is required by law.
Mhm.
It's not something that we made up. What I made up is the stuff starting right at the point you see on the screen now, the screening procedures. So the tenant disclosure is required by law. And I made one for landlords that is not required by law, but it gives them information about what the required process is.
And even though it's not required by law, it's super helpful to CYA for us agents so that they know up front, you know, how the whole process is going to work and they don't put themselves and you in a sticky situation. So this is the form that is now required to be signed up front before you have your applicant do the NTN online screening. Okay, this is the landlord version that Dawn was mentioning. Okay, so this one is not required by law, but is probably a good idea for you to have signed. We talked about the notice of conditional approval. That's this form here. So if their initial NTN credit and eviction screening comes back with an appropriate score, your landlord can choose, again, one tenant at a time, fill this out, send it to the applicant, and request that they move forward with the NTN criminal history report. And then here is the withdrawal that we spoke about. So if your landlord has already offered your tenant a conditional approval, but then decides that there's something in the criminal history report that would prevent them from wanting to rent to that client, they would then have to follow up with this notice. Okay, and it has links for all the additional.
This is very detailed, and everything on this page is required by the Division on Civil Rights, including the information about how to file a complaint if they believe they have been mistreated during the process.
Yeah, that's what we're looking at right here. But it also has a lot of good links for you and your landlord where they can go and review that information. Yep. Okay. And then lastly, let's look at the new NTN. So you guys should all be familiar with this. So all that is different is this bottom section. Okay. So when your tenant client fills out the initial online NTN app, you're going to fill out this above section and you're going to email it to orders@ntnj.com. You will get a response from them when the report has been generated. You will click the link and enter this password right here, Fox and Roach 1, and you will get the results. If they are then conditionally approved and a request is made that they complete the criminal history portion, you would take this same form you've already filled out, check this bottom box, and put in the number that is on from the original report and send it back. Okay, and you can see both Emily and Dawn are right down here at the bottom if you have any questions about how to do this or what results you're getting, stuff like that. Okay, and we're going to go back to another flow chart for NTN specifically. Okay, so this is how the new NTN process works. And it's worth mentioning that for Fox and Roach agents, we are required to use the NTN application if you want to be fully covered under your E&O insurance. Okay, so if your landlord is insisting on using some other rental application, you probably want to run that past someone before you do. Okay, so again, agent sends the client the link, applicant fills it out and pays for the report online. If there are co-applicants, the initial applicant will enter their name and email address, and the co-applicant will receive an email with a link to complete their own individual application. You find out that the application has been completed and you fill out that order request form that I just showed you, and you email it to NTN. You get a notification from NTN once the report is complete. You view the report, that's it. And then you would just basically repeat the process from here when you have to do the secondary criminal history report. Okay, and there's additional information in here if you want to understand NTN more. There's a whole like fact sheet in here from NTN that explain, the scores, what's included in the decision point score, what is held against your client and how much, what is the FICO score. So if you're getting one of these reports, it's your first time seeing it and you're not understanding what everything is, this sheet is going to explain it to you. These are, again, all found within the NTN Secure App link in your ACE dashboard. Okay, does anybody, looks like we do have some questions. Let's open this up.
I'm working on them.
Oh, sweet, thanks, Dawn.
No problem.
Okay, so good point. If a tenant doesn't have a computer and they can't fill out the report online, that is why all of our offices have resource computers. So you can set up a meeting with your client to go ahead and have them use one of our computers in the office. Please speak to the issue of not supplying the NTN reports to a tenant. Very difficult to justify when they have paid $40 for each, especially when they have to continue their search. Dawn, you want to address that, whether the client gets a copy of their own report?
Yeah, I wrote an answer, and let me tell you what I wrote.
Oh, great.
Reports from NTN are not consumer credit reports and are for the screening purposes used by landlords when making decisions. The tenant is not paying for a physical report. Rather, they are paying NTN for the services involved in generating the report and collecting the data. If the tenant wants a copy, we can send them to NTN where NTN will work with them to get them a copy of the report. We ask that our agents not provide the report. partly because the tenants tend to defraud the reports and make them look better than they actually are. So people are very skilled with Adobe these days, and they change their score of 38 to either 58 or 98, or I've seen all kinds of fraudulent reports because people just change the numbers and the colors. So yeah, so we ask you not to provide that because they're not buying a report. They're paying NTN for service.
It's an application fee, if you want to think about it that way, right? So Marge, hopefully that answers your question. If they do want a copy of the report, they can reach out to NTN directly and obtain a copy that way. So it's not like they're not allowed to have it. We just shouldn't be giving it to them as agents.
Correct. I see, Nicole, is there an actual application connected to the NTN report? When the applicants do their application online, if you check the appropriate box on the credit summary request form, you can get a copy of that application that they have completed. So yes, there is, but it's not like they show up, not like the one that shows up in zip forms. It happens by virtue of the fact that they complete the online application and then NTN turns it into a PDF.
Yeah, so generally when I request a copy of the report, I request a copy of the actual application at the same time, but the information that's on that application is pretty limited. So sometimes you'll be able to use that if the landlord is requesting that they fill out a physical, like offer to rent or application or what have you, and they don't just want the report, they want an actual application. If not, you can go into zip forms. And if you're using, you know, either the New Jersey tenant or New Jersey landlord global template rather, then there is right here, application for rent.
Right, I got to give you a warning. That's going to disappear temporarily because there are questions on it about criminal. So I have to remove those and it'll have to be reprogrammed at zip forms. So it is going to disappear.
Okay. So maybe if you need to use this right now, just X out.
Yeah.
X out those sections.
Yeah, use a black marker and redact it.
Yeah, exactly.
And Marge, I see you asked, how are they to reach out to NTN for the report? You can Google NTN, and the local NTN office, even though it's a national company, is in Washington Township, actually almost exactly across the street from our Washington Township office. So just look for that 856 number and give them a call. They're nice people.
Yep, and someone else asked, where do you find the link? So if you are in your ACE dashboard, one, it's on that piece of paper I showed you, the order form. It lists it right on there. Tenant
Disclosure.
Yep, it's on the disclosure. Yep. Or if you just want to be able to send them a link in an email, do the same thing. Go into your ACE dashboard, type in NTN. This first thing right here, NTN Secure App, takes you to the actual link. And as you can see at the top, it's very simple. If I highlight the URL, it's www.foxroach.com/NTN. So all they would have to do is click on whichever state or city of Philadelphia apparently has its own. So for us, they would click on New Jersey. And this is what they're going to see.
Yeah. So just so you know, the NTN has reprogrammed their system to be compliant with the Fair Chance and Housing Act for New Jersey. And the reason that you see a Philadelphia specific one link is that they also have certain requirements, but they're different from New Jersey. So it behooves an agent to use the link that is appropriate, or the applicants to use the link that's appropriate for the location of the property that they're applying for.
So Wendy asked, can we attach the fair housing screening form in the MLS to the rental listing? Why not?
So
there's a
and I have a question for you,
yeah.
Wendy, and that is, are you talking about the tenant disclosure?
Yes, I'm talking about that tenant disclosure that also has the steps involved in it that they have to sign off on.
Right. So the Division on Civil Rights has been very specific about how they constructed this, and they don't want passive methods to be used, because they want the tenants to actively learn about the process and accept it. So I guess it would be okay as long as the tenant signed off before you took any action.
So what I would say, this is the document we're talking about, everybody, that's up on my screen now. What I would say is that you absolutely can upload this into the documents section of the MLS listing. And something we were going to talk about under best practices is when you're writing an MLS rental listing, that you're super clear about what the requirements are for tenants to apply, so that it is publicly the same for any tenant, right? So if you upload this document along with the instruction sheet on how they can get to the NTN application, you can, in the notes to agent or wherever the appropriate section is where you're telling them how to apply, just say that any tenant who is applying must sign this form and include it with their application. Does that make sense? Cool. Okay. Let's see, do we have any other messages here? Is there going to be a replacement application for the time being while waiting for the updated application to be uploaded? So probably
No, it's
not.
the online application.
Yeah, just have them use the NTN one. And then if you're representing the tenant and the landlord is insisting that there's an additional application, they probably have one that they want you to fill out. So you can always request whatever application from that listing agent.
Yeah, these days when you're doing that, it would be smart to review that application before giving it to the tenant. And if there are any questions about criminal background, they should be removed before the tenant receives it.
You can strike those out in zip forms, or like Dawn said, you know, Sharpie marker and
Yep.
then scan it to them. Okay. So that kind of covers all the forms. Are we good with forms? All right, so real quick, we're gonna go, where am I? All the way back over to here. All right, and we're gonna cover best practices, which we kind of already did, but let's just read through this real quick. So to recap, have a discussion with your clients up front, whether it's a tenant or a landlord. Thoroughly explain the process they will need to go through, what the required forms are and why, and the applicable laws. Now, you are not a lawyer, so this does not mean that you have to explain in full these laws. What you should be able to do is point out what the laws are that will apply and be able to direct your client to additional information about those laws. Okay, so don't take it upon yourself to try to interpret the law for your client. You should always collect any necessary information and supporting documents up front. So if we're talking about, you know, a tenant client, that can be driver's license, pay stubs, etc. If we're talking about a landlord, you want to get a copy of the deed. You don't want to be the agent that puts up a rental listing for someone who doesn't own the property, right? So know what you need. And if you are ever unsure of what you need, you just look in DTR and it's going to have what all of the required documents are in the task list in DTR. Make sure you're getting all the required forms signed. I can tell you that when all these changes came into effect and I took the initial class with Dawn that was teaching us all about these law changes, I made myself a checklist of what all the new forms are, so I didn't miss anything. Okay, so you can always do that for yourself until everything in zip forms is updated. As I already mentioned, make sure that you are using the NTN application for all your rental listings in order to be fully covered under our E&O insurance. And as I, again, already mentioned, please be clear if you're entering a listing for a rental in the MLS, what is going to be required for tenants who want to apply, and make sure that your landlord is following that same process across the board with every single tenant. I can't tell you how many rental listings I look at in the MLS, and there's zero information about what that landlord wants as far, as an application. I have to waste my time reaching out to the listing agent, trying to get the information. Sometimes it's piecemeal. They tell me one thing, then they go, oh, by the way, we need this too. And you have no idea if they're following that same process for every tenant or not. If you just put it up front in the MLS, then there's no question.
So I'm seeing a couple of questions, one in particular that I would like to address. So Margie, your question is, when a tenant agent says their client will not do an NTN application as they already paid for another type of credit report, how do we protect ourselves given that E&O requires us to use NTN? So here's what E&O requires of you. What's required under the E&O policy is that you offer the experience and opportunity to have an NTN report generated on behalf of your tenant or on behalf of your landlord. I want us to push the landlords really hard. But when agents from other brokerages are coming into our listings in particular, they may have already been screened by their broker, and you do not have to insist that they get another report done. If, however, they've not been screened, then I would strongly encourage that agent to have run them through our system. So although the requirement is a little bit rigid, it's really more about you need to offer that opportunity in writing to all the consumers. And we want to really see it pushed on the landlord side so that we are not putting anyone in the position of potentially either having their identity stolen or giving more information than is necessary, or, having social security numbers floating around in the universe. So that's what the actual policy says. And, we totally understand that agents are not going to want their clients to spend additional money just to get our report. But if they haven't spent money at all, then we'd really like them to do our report. Does that make sense?
So Dawn, follow-up question for that, because as agents, we're basically always told that we have to do what the landlord wants, obviously within the bounds of the law, right? So
Yep.
If the landlord is the one that's saying, I only want to review NTN reports because I want them all to look the same, I don't want to have to interpret 6 different kinds of reports, are we then within our rights and within the bounds of the law to basically tell these people, I'm sorry that you've already paid for something else, but my landlord requires this application?
I would certainly let the other agents know that the landlord has requested something specifically.
Yeah.
And then I don't know. I think it's difficult because when we get an offer on something, we're required under the Code of Ethics to present it. So what I will say is presenting an offer and the landlord actually spending time to fairly review it and, try to learn the new system is not a requirement. So if that landlord says, well, I'm not really going to look at this one because I asked for a specific format and they did not send it to me, then, that's a different issue. But the offer would still need to be presented in order for us to be compliant with the Code of Ethics.
Correct. We as agents cannot make that determination, but
Correct.
The landlord can.
Yeah.
Something we should also bring up while we're on this topic is that not all rental applications or reports are created the same. And one that we're seeing a lot more now is the rent spree application through the MLS. And I know, Dawn, you and I chatted a little bit about kind of the pitfalls with that one. So would you like to address kind of the potential
Sure.
issues with using that?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. There are a couple of other screening programs out there. Rent Spree is very common. There's another one that's similar. I have a couple of different hesitations about Rent Spree. First, in regard to the Fair Chance in Housing Act, rather than program their system to become compliant with the requirements of the law, they have chosen to just disregard criminal background screenings at all. And I think that that company making a decision like that for all landlords is not the best way to go about it. So I'm not too happy with that decision that they've made. Secondarily, one of the major bonuses of using National Tenant Network is that it is not a fully computerized program. Yes, a computer sweeps the TransUnion information and analyzes it technically and generates a report. However, that report does not come out to you. That report goes nowhere until it is fully screened and vetted by a human being to make sure that you've got the right Jim Smith. You know, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Jim Smiths around, and NTN takes a little extra time to give you a personalized screening that ensures that you have the right individual and not all the other Jim Smiths in the area. So that alone is worth, you know, sometimes it's going to take you an hour to get a report from NTN. Rent Spree is done in 30 seconds, but you don't know what you're getting in that report. And I will say that in the very beginning of our relationship with National Tenant Network, we had a lot of mismatched criminal reports and eviction histories, because those two histories are matters of public record and are not screened on the basis of a social security number. They're screened on the basis of geography, so where the person lived, and name. Sometimes they get the birth date correct, but often there's a mismatch on a different year. So it takes a little bit of extra work to give you the report that you can fully depend on. And Rent Spree doesn't do that. So we also, in case you don't know, we recently added the credit score to the NTN report. So although we're not giving a full and complete credit report, we do have the credit score there because a lot of landlords seem really, really stuck on the credit score. So that's why the report went up to $40. You have to pay for those.
So it's that FICO score that is now included.
Yeah, it does.
Perfect. Thank you, Dawn. I just recently ran into this with a tenant client where they were forced to do a Rent Spree application, and it was a hot mess. So
A hot mess.
It's a hot mess. There was evictions that weren't them, and yeah.
With 2 S's.
Yeah. All right. So before we sign off, here's my last slide for all of you today. Please feel free to grab a screenshot of it, or I'm happy to send you these links via email. But these are, you know, some of the resources we covered today, as well as some additional resources that you can direct your clients to. So once again, the NTN application link is just www.foxroach.com/NTN. The Fair Chance in Housing Act information can be found at the New Jersey State Government website at that link that I have right here. And within that website, there are tons of additional, you know, tabs and links where you or your clients can get any relevant information about the laws, how they apply, how to interpret them, etc. Something Dawn showed us, which was fantastic when we took her class, was the master statute table. And this is the guidelines provided by the Civil Rights Division on Civil Rights that explains to your landlord what all of those crazy codes are when they receive a criminal history report, what they mean, and then how they are allowed to use that information. So real quick, let's see if we can take a look at that, and Dawn can explain it way better than me. What we're
Woohoo.
go.
Yeah. So this is a 17-page table that describes all the crimes that exist and have been identified in the state of New Jersey. You'll notice on the left-hand side here, it gives you the statute and code. It then tells you what degree of crime. 1 is worse, 4 is not so bad. So 4 is all your shoplifting convictions. 1, it tends to be crimes where someone was either injured or died or was purposeful or lots of
You can
things.
read
And
the
then,
first 3 and see what code 1 is, right?
yeah, exactly. Murder purposely,
Yeah.
murder knowingly. I'm not
Yeah.
sure what the difference is, and murder during the commission of another crime. So, these are serious complaints. So, what's important here is that if someone has been, and it's about convictions, it's not about arrests. So if they have been convicted of a first-degree crime, and let's just say it was purposeful knowing murder, and somehow they're out of jail, from the point they've been released from jail for that first-degree crime, there is a period of 6 years that the landlord is allowed to reject. On the 7th year, providing there's been no repeat offense, the landlord is no longer allowed to consider that crime. So this becomes a very important, serious document. Those crimes that are 2nd and 3rd degree have a 4-year look back period. So the first one was 6-year look back period. The 2nd and 3rd degrees are 4-year look back period. And these are still pretty serious crimes, like leaving the scene of an accident that caused bodily injury or death. I mean, that's pretty serious. But those crimes you tend to get out of jail quicker for. And then the 1st degree crimes, some of these look pretty bad here. Vehicular homicide with a DWI. They only carry with it a 1-year look back period from the point of either conviction or release from prison or jail or whatever. I think it's prison once you're convicted.
Do you mean the 4th degree crimes only have a 1-year look back period?
Sorry, yes, the 4th degree crime. So sorry.
1 degree is 6 years. 2 and 3 is 4 years. I mean, 2 and 3 is 4 years.
2 and 3 is
then
4.
4 degree is 1 year.
Exactly. So this chart is extremely important for use by landlords when making their decisions about whether or not whatever crime they're looking at actually counts. Now, there are a few crimes that are lifelong, you don't have to consider, and they're what we call heinous crimes. So a lot of murder is a heinous crime. Aggravated sexual assault is a heinous crime. Sexual assault against a child is a heinous crime. Arson is a heinous crime. Cooking meth, like you do, is a heinous crime. And I think cooking meth on federal property gets you a lifelong no look back period. Just regular cooking meth, I think, is, as long as it's not on federal property, it comes with a 6-year look back period. And then, any kind of a lifelong Megan's Law registration is forever. So it's quite a list here.
Yep.
I'm sorry to laugh, but it's
No,
just like,
it's
so
intense, right?
There's nothing
But
else you can do.
yeah, at least they took the time to provide this information so that your landlord isn't just looking at a bunch of criminal codes and going, okay, what does this mean? And am I allowed to consider this when I'm deciding on a tenant? Okay.
So when your landlord is trying to look at this, he's going to look at you and say, I don't even know how to start to figure this out. And so I'll give you a couple of tips. Number one, you should always look at the date of the conviction or the date of release from prison. That will start the look back period. Secondly, you need to look on the far left column. This gives you the actual identification of the crime itself, and it should match the code that's provided on the NTN criminal background report. So as long as they match, you're good.
Okay, any questions about that? No, okay. So that was the master statute table link that's right there. And then the final link is the actual link that I showed you in the ACE dashboard, where
Right.
you can find the NTN forms and all of the new additional forms that we covered today. So this is a direct link to the Google Drive folder that houses those forms, but they can also, again, be found on the dashboard right here where it says NTN Tenant Application Process. Okay. Let me hop back on real quick. Here I am. All right, so were there any questions that we missed? Anything that anybody wants me to go back through again quickly before we sign off today? How is everyone feeling about doing rentals now? Are we more optimistic and willing to consider them? Have I scared you more? Feel free to chime in for me, let me know. Go ahead and unmute yourselves. How are we feeling?
Yeah, thank you. It was very informative. And I feel better about it.
Good, glad to hear it.
Yay.
That was the goal today, so thanks for that. All right, so if everyone's good, I'm gonna go ahead and let everyone get out of here. Thank you, thank you, thank you for taking the time to attend today. If you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to shoot myself or Dawn an email and we will make sure we get those answers for you. All right.
Great.
Thank you, Dawn.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. Well, I'm sure
All
I'll
right,
see you
bye-bye.
soon. Okay, bye.